Hey there, it's good to be with you guys. My name is Jamie Torkowski, and I'm the founder of a nonprofit called To Write Love on Her Arms. And I must admit that this is a first for me. Normally when there's an invitation to speak somewhere, it involves an airplane and a stage, and normally I fly there, but in this case there is pretty unique. But it's an honor to get to be with you guys and to get to share a little bit of our story. It's been a really surprising story that I've had the privilege of being a part of over the last 6 years. And maybe one of the most interesting components is that we didn't set out to start a charity. We didn't set out to start a movement. We just tried to tell a story, and we tried to help one friend back in 2006. And just to give you the brief background, I met a girl through a mutual friend. I was living with my buddy David in Orlando at the time, and David's story is one of addiction and recovery. And through David, I met his friend Renee. And Renee was in a really difficult place back in 2006. She was in the middle of a season of depression, addiction, had known a history of self-injury. We later learned she had attempted suicide more than once. And she was denied entry into a local treatment center in Orlando. And my friends and I ended up spending the next 5 days that followed with Renee. And she lived in our living room, and these were her first days sober in a long time, her first days coming down and sort of coming back to life. And I had the privilege of sharing her story. I asked her what she thought about that possibility of just telling her story, and expected the answer to be no. You know, that was a really vulnerable question or idea. And she responded and really loved the idea that maybe there could be a purpose for her pain, that maybe other people could relate, other people could find hope in her story being told. And so I sat down and wrote a couple pages once she did enter treatment, and kept coming back to this odd title that was actually a phrase I had used in the story. And the title was To Write Love on Her Arms. And really that was a goal. It was a goal that represented believing the possibility that her life could be something different than it had been, that maybe a better life was possible for her, and maybe there were some things that could be true in the face of a lot of lies that she had bought into. And 2006 was kind of the moment of this thing called MySpace, sort of this alternate universe that was starting to happen online. And so what I did after I wrote the story was I had the idea to give the story a home online. And so I created a MySpace page and posted the story as a blog. And then we realized that Renee's treatment was going to cost money. And so I had the idea to sell some t-shirts just locally in Central Florida to try to raise money for her treatment. And then really where everything changed, where everything really turned the corner, was these t-shirts ended up in the hands of some friends who play in bands. And they play in front of hundreds of people, if not thousands, every night. And so these t-shirts started to end up on stage. And we never asked for it. We never solicited for this. But what happened next was we started to hear from people who made their way to the MySpace page and essentially just told us that the story we were telling was their story. People shared, difficult things. They asked questions they'd never asked before. They talked about what it was to lose a loved one to suicide or to addiction. They asked how they knew this person, they cared about this person, and they wanted to help but didn't know how. And we heard all sorts of questions and confessions, and just realized we had, stumbled upon a bigger story, and maybe stumbled upon an opportunity to talk about these things on a bigger scale, and also to invest in treatment on a bigger scale beyond the life of one person. And I was working a sales job that I thought was my dream job at the time for a clothing company called Hurley. And a few months later, I ended up giving that job back to focus on To Write Love on Her Arms full time. And I've done that ever since. And if you could fast forward from then to now, for the first year, we were under the umbrella of another nonprofit. For the last 5 years or so, we've been on our own as a 501c3. We now have a staff of 12, and we always have 5 or 6 full-time volunteer interns. And we've just found ourselves in this really unique position to talk about things that millions of people around the world struggle with. But we've learned these tend to be issues that people don't talk about. They don't know maybe how, they don't know if they're allowed. We're not sure what response we might be met with. And so if you add it all up, our team has now been able to respond to in the neighborhood of 175,000 messages, and they've come in to us from more than 100 different countries. And so we've learned some really basic things. We've learned these aren't American issues. We've learned these aren't white people or emo issues. We've learned instead that maybe this is part of being human. This is part of being alive on this planet. And I think one of the things we're most proud of is that our website, our Facebook, our Twitter has really become a source of hope and encouragement. for so many people around the world. And, the whole thing has really been a surprise. And I think there's a great freedom in that we didn't set out to start a charity. And I didn't grow up dreaming of, being the head of one. And so we don't really feel any pressure to look or talk or think like the nonprofits that came before us, or maybe, what we would call the average nonprofit. I think because this started with a story and the language that showed up there, we've continued to just try to tell a story, and we've continued maybe to put at the top of the list that we really just want to move people. And it's interesting whenever there's a fundraising component, in terms of a speaking invitation, it's a little bit ironic because first off, we're primarily funded by t-shirt sales, and that's been the case since the beginning for us. We don't spend a lot of time talking or thinking or even asking for donations. One unique exception in the fundraising department is that we did win $1 million last December in the American Giving Awards presented by Chase Bank. We don't spend a lot of time talking about money. We don't like asking for money. We really try not to sound like we're selling something. I think we really try to see things through this lens of how can we provide value to people? How can we encourage people? How can we meet people where they are and deliver things, whether it's a tweet or an article or a blog or, an event, a speaking event at a school, whatever it may be, that just leave people feeling less alone, that really encourage and challenge people to get the help that they might need or to have one of these conversations for the first time. And so we really, I think, have found ourselves in a unique position in that we've seen such a tremendous audience grow over the years. And, in terms of the numbers, we're now well over 1 million people that have come across our Facebook page. We're over 200,000 who follow us on Twitter. And I think, in terms of the behind the scenes belief for us, it really, there's not a lot of marketing language. There's not a lot of financial language in terms of how do we engage these folks. But it's really, I think, inviting them into our story and believing that we're talking about issues that all people can relate to. And so maybe you relate from your own life as an individual. Maybe you relate because of your family or because of, a husband or a wife or a girlfriend or boyfriend or a classmate or relative. I think we love kind of creating a platform where we can invite people into what we would like to think is an honest conversation that's really long overdue. And just a little bit about, I guess, what we value in terms of how we communicate. I think we really value language. Going back to the very beginning, we don't use a lot of clinical language. We maybe don't use a lot of what you might think of as nonprofit language. I think going back to the original story we told in 2006, it was perhaps this poetic language and really this human or even conversational language. And we just try to use language that young people can relate to. Most of our team is made up of young people. I'm 32 and I'm the second oldest on our staff. I'll put an asterisk by that and say that we do believe in wisdom and we do lean on some people who are older and wiser, and we're quick to pick up the phone and ask for help. But, our team is made up of young people, and so we feel like we do speak the language of the folks who connect with us online and follow us. And we really value design. Going back to the original T-shirt, there was this feeling that if we were trying to sell a T-shirt to raise money, that T-shirt should be one that people want to wear. If a T-shirt looks cool, you're probably going to sell more, especially when you can get the heart of it right as well. That this T-shirt meant something, there was a story there, and then we wanted it to be well designed. And I think hopefully that translates to our website, and really everything we do. We do see things just through this lens of how does this look, how does this feel, and I think really just again coming back to that heart of the matter of we're trying to move people. And I think beyond that, as the years have gone by, as we've been able to build a team, we have seen our income streams grow and evolve, and it's been able to take some of the pressure off the T-shirt sales. And one of the biggest questions, maybe the biggest question we've got going back to the very beginning, was how can I help? How can I get involved? And so we've been able to add a couple different programs just to give people specific tools, especially young people who say, I want I want to help. I love what you're doing. How can I be a part of this? And so we just launched a high school campaign called The Storytellers, which is a fundraising campaign. We believe it's more than that. You know, the goal is really to bring this conversation to high schools across the country and beyond. But in terms of an action point, there is a fundraising component. And so the spring semester that just ended was our first semester with that. And we were really pleasantly surprised with how well it was received, and just giving young people the chance to take ownership of our story, and in a way this little business. It's really rooted in them selling bracelets at their school, and it was so cool to see the excitement and the passion that was met with. Another one is just giving people the tools to create benefit events for us. So whether that's a benefit concert or different creative ways that people host events. Our team is small. We can't be everywhere all the time. And so over the years, we've been able to create, ways and guidelines that people can host these events in the places that they live. And that's really become a source of support for us as well. And again, I think in addition, it also becomes a way that people can find out about the work we're doing, why we think it's important. And, I think we really just come back to this feeling, this belief that people want to live good stories. That we, as individuals, we want to believe that our story matters, that our story is significant. Through the lens of the issues we talk about, I think people want to believe that their story is worth fighting for, that it's worth staying alive for. And, I think also really believe that people want to be a part of a story that's bigger than themselves. That people are looking to participate in things that matter. And so I guess all of that to tie back to, the fact that we don't spend a lot of time asking for people to write checks. We don't spend a lot of time even trying to sell the t-shirts that do support what we do. But I think we've really learned that just trying to move people, trying to provide content that has value to it, the rest of it, I guess in our experience, it has kind of taken care of itself. And it's been a really, really amazing thing to be a part of. How are we on time?
Oh, we're good.
Okay, cool. And then I guess just to kind of circle back to some of, practically the problems and solutions that we talk about. I think a lot of times I point out that we're different because maybe the average charity is something like a triangle, where I'm talking to you and I'm asking you to care about this thing that's happening over there. And maybe it's another country, maybe it's a specific people group in another place. But I think with what we do with To Write Love on Our Arms, it's less about the triangle, and it's really more just this straight line where we're communicating to a person, and of course we're asking them to care, but I think we're believing that these are problems that are happening in a way that the individual can relate to. It's not far off on the other side of the world. It's not this thing that maybe they feel like they can't relate to, but we're in a unique position where we're just trying to move the person who's listening, and whether that's the online audience, whether that's the audience at a music festival or a college event, we think there's something unique about that in terms of comparing us to another charity. And we also think there's a lot of freedom with that. I think the big picture, we're really talking about the human condition in terms of the question that kind of hangs over all the issues that we talk about. It's really what do I do with my pain? What do I do with the things in my life that I wish were different? And so that's a really broad canvas, I think, for us to paint on. There's a lot of freedom to be creative, and creativity is something that we really value. And again, I think that translates to language and words in terms of the writing that we post. It translates to design, whether we're designing something for, an online platform or a t-shirt that we're going to sell. We really believe we have this message that's simple. We didn't invent hope. We didn't invent help, but we believe in these things deeply. And so we, I think, continue to come back to the idea of how can we be creative in packaging this message that we believe in so much. And we've been met with such an amazing response, and I think the best compliment we ever get, or I ever get, is when people say, "Hey, I'm still alive because of the work that you guys are doing." And so we now hear from people who are sitting across from a counselor for the first time, We hear from people that have stepped into treatment, maybe for the first time, maybe for the fourth or fifth time. Hear from folks that have called a crisis hotline or a suicide hotline and in a really desperate moment chosen to stay alive. And, we've learned that most people who need help, the first step is the one that they never take. We've learned that 2 out of 3 people who struggle with depression, they never get help for it. And that was a statistic that really surprised me and has really stayed with me over the years. And what that says is that in terms of solving this problem, it's not as simple as just funding treatment. It's not as simple as just writing a check that goes to, rehab or a treatment center or a counseling center. What that 2 out of 3 number says is that most people never take the first step to get the help that they need and deserve. And so I think we have come to believe that the biggest thing that we do is communicate. And most of that happens online, and then it does happen, through various settings, college campuses, university chapters, the new Storytellers high school campaign, college events that we get to do. But we feel like the biggest thing we do is simply to communicate. We're trying to change that number. We're trying to encourage and challenge and invite people to get the help that they need. And it's been amazing to see that happen, not just in America, not just in North America, but around the world, that we hear from folks in so many different places that we've never been to, places where we don't know anyone, but places where this message is translating. And, it's been such an amazing thing to be a part of. Hang on, I'm going to look at him for a second. No questions?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, cool.
25 minutes.
Okay, good deal. So hopefully that might come to a bit of a surprise, for some of you, and that might even be hard for some people to relate to, in terms of maybe you feel like you live in or you work in a nonprofit space that is deeply connected to fundraising and to asking for that. And that's obviously not a bad thing. I think that's the reality for most nonprofits. We're super thankful and want to be humble and grateful in knowing that we find ourselves in a unique situation in terms of being funded by primarily merchandise sales and T-shirts specifically. But I do think there's a reality to the fact that there's so much information online. There's so many companies and people fighting for our attention. There's so many brands trying to sell us something. And for most of us, we don't want to be sold something. It's easy to point out the feeling of a used car lot and how most of us aren't very comfortable and aren't in a hurry to spend time there. And, I think if you relate that to Facebook or Twitter and even to nonprofits using those platforms, there's a lot of people asking for our attention. And so I think we're really careful, and I think we really try to be sensitive to that and just to not sounding like salesmen. There's times where there are needs that we can invite people into. The $1 million, the American Giving Awards was a really interesting moment for us because we weren't asking our young people for their money. We were simply asking for their vote and for them to help spread the word. And for young people who may not have a lot of money, that was, I think, something they could get really excited about, was that they got to play a small part in this really huge moment. Really for us, the biggest moment we've ever had. And I don't know. So it seems like there's a trend where there's more and more of those opportunities. Obviously, the American Giving Awards, it's the biggest one I've ever heard of. But it seems like there's more and more opportunities in terms of online grants and online giving and different contests where really you're just asking young people to vote. It's these bigger bigger companies that are willing to invest in these charities and in good projects. But it seems like the voice and the vote of the young people more and more is what decides that. And so I think we're really grateful and thankful to have this audience that we're already communicating with on a daily basis. And I think in terms of, what we just continue to come back to the reality that when we do things, that when we communicate things that resonate with young people, that's when we see the biggest response. Every morning on Twitter, we do a quote of the day that's the busiest thing that we do in terms of it's met with the most excited response. It's what generates the most retweets. And I think it's just because we're putting something out there that resonates with people, and then they're taking ownership and sharing that and getting excited about it, and we're also communicating ideas that represent us and represent this conversation that we're trying to invite people into. So hopefully that's a little bit behind the scenes. I know that's brief and broad, but a little bit of kind of our story and how we got here, and this irony of being a charity that has really taken off, but was never intended to be a charity, and that to this day is something that I kind of smile about. And there's certainly been challenges in terms of getting organized and learning what does it mean to be a nonprofit, to run a nonprofit. There's been growing pains, there's been challenges along the way, but on behalf of those folks that we hear from who are now getting help, who maybe are now literally still alive because of this project, that's what keeps us going. And I think I sometimes point out the idea that if you meet someone on a plane and you tell them, if someone asks me, what do you do? And I say, I work for a nonprofit, in some people's mind, it seems like that's all they want to hear, like that's enough. But I usually point out that if you met someone and they just told you they work for a for-profit, that wouldn't really tell you anything. So I think we're really trying to kind of, I guess, break the mold a little bit and remember that the heart of the matter is not how we, file our 990 at the end of the year, but the heart of the matter is doing something that speaks to people, that makes life easier and better and healthier for people, especially young people around the world. And we're a nonprofit, and there's a lot of good that comes with that. There's a lot that we're thankful for because of that. So I will. I'll leave it there, and then I think we're going to open it up for questions.
Yeah. We have one. It's so few separate parts here. How do you separate your organization from other organizations in the mind of millennials? There are so many great organizations out there vying for the time and attention. Can people only have one passion, or can they get involved in multiple causes? And how would you encourage young people to be purposeful, effective, but not spread too thin?
Did they know I'm going to answer that question? Okay. So basically, just how do we separate ourselves? And I think we have peers, we have friends, we have charities that we relate to, that we look up to. We're close to the folks at Invisible Children. We're close to people at Charity Water. And, of course, there's people that have worked in this field for years and years, for decades, and not just nonprofits, but even in the realm of suicide prevention or mental health. And I think we just try to be true to the opportunities that we have, to the gifts that we have, and really to the story that we continue to live out. What are the things that got us here? What's the language that we use? And it's easy to look over your shoulder or to look around and think, oh, they're doing this, we should be like them. And of course, there's ways that we can all, learn from each other. But I think at a certain point, you have to keep your head down and say, who are we supposed to be? And so we, I think don't spend too much time trying to separate ourselves. I think we're not competing against other charities. If there's 1 million people who were in their Facebook feed, then we have the opportunity to communicate to those 1 million people or to that 1 million people. And so I think the real question for us is not what's everyone else doing or how can we do it better, but it's, I think, just what do we want to say to these folks who follow us? What is this conversation that we're trying to have? And really just putting that audience first in terms of how do we care about them? How do we encourage them? How do we give them resources? How do we point to articles that are going to be informative? How do we point to places where they can get help or where they can find help for someone they care about? And then I guess it was just
how do you encourage young people to be purposeful, effective, and not spread too thin?
Yeah, I don't know. I think for some young people, there's the mentality that you can only have your one favorite charity, and I think I don't know. We don't spend too much time worried about that. We're probably the closest associated from a distance and also internally, relationally, with the people at Invisible Children. And we hear from kids, or we see it online, where people say, "Oh, I'm a To Right Love in Our Arms person," or "I'm an Invisible Children person," and the reality is that these two organizations root for each other. We share ideas, and I think 15. So we don't think it's the kind of thing where you have to pick your favorite. I think it's really a matter of what matters to you, what resonates to you, what are the problems on this planet that break your heart, and what are the ways you can get involved in being part of the solution. And for some people, mental health, depression, addiction is something deeply personal, and so we hope we can be something that matters to them or is inspiring or encouraged to them. And for someone else, they might really connect with the story of things happening in different countries and continents around the world. Maybe the idea that some people don't have clean water breaks their heart, and so they really connect with the work of Charity Water. And we're all for good things that are happening.
How would you suggest that an organization go about collecting and sharing the stories of millennials? What do you think compels them to share their stories?
Say it one more time.
How would you suggest that an organization go about collecting and sharing the stories of millennials? What do you think compels them to share their stories?
To answer the last part first, I just believe that we, and you can use the word you're comfortable with, but that we've been created, or we're wired where we desire to be known. We desire to be loved. One of my favorite lines or moments in the new Spider-Man movie, the teacher is teaching, I don't know if it's a writing class or an English class, and she says, there's this belief that there's 10 different plot lines in stories, and she points out this counterpoint that maybe there's only one, which is, who am I? And so I think whether we think about it every day or not, we want our stories to be told. We want to know that I'm unique, that I'm significant, that this life, this day that I'm living actually matters, that it could matter to some people. And so I think if you can, whether it's through a campaign or through tweets or blogs or whatever it may be, videos, if you can, connect what you're doing with someone and even create an invitation for their story to be told, and in the midst of that to validate their story and tell someone that their story matters, I think that's wonderful. And we've seen it play out in a lot of different ways. We've at first it was just comments on a MySpace page back in 2006. Sometimes it plays out in during the Q&A we do out on a college campus after a talk, where someone won't have a question, but they'll just really desire to share something that maybe they've never shared before. We've had people write in. We receive people's stories every day, whether it's over email or notes and letters that arrive at our office. We, I think, took a closer look and launched a campaign called Fears versus Dreams that's really rooted in the idea of being intentional about this idea of people living a story. And so we've invited people all around the world to answer two questions, one being, what's your biggest fear? The second being, what's your greatest dream? And it's been amazing to see people pose for portraits where they actually own and hold their answers to those questions. And so we've tried to do it through a few different mediums, and it's actually something we think we want to get a lot better at. We just actually won a $3,000 grant a couple weeks ago that's going to allow us to make a couple more videos where we literally just tell more stories. And so we've started this Story Of campaign where we just, we come across stories, whether it's the story of an individual or a band, and we have this unique platform where we're able to share that. And really the hope is not to just, brag about this one story, but to put something up there that other people can relate to and maybe that they can feel less alone because of.
Repeat these when I want to ask. I love how you emphasize to tell a story. I think is so true. But do you have to work to keep all staff telling the same central message in their stories? How do you make sure that you aren't telling multiple stories that may go in different directions? Does that make sense?
So that it ends with, how do we make sure that we aren't telling stories that go in different directions? Right. So I think it's really a question of consistency. And, we within our staff, different people play different parts. And so not everyone is out in front of people speaking. Not everyone is writing content for the site. I think it really speaks to the value of our editor, and our editor is really the filter in terms of what people see every day, in terms of what they see on our Facebook page or our Twitter feed, or the news or the blogs that go up on our website. And that really is filtered by not only our editor, but Chris, who actually introduced me who's our director of communication and spends a lot of time focusing on our social media. And we do think a lot about consistency, and we think about, but I also think within that, different stories are going to have different endings, and we want to be honest, maybe more than anything else. Some stories will be difficult. Some stories won't resolve. Some stories will be hopeful, and they might have a happy ending. We want to tell stories that relate to what we do. We think that it's not just one or the other, but in a lot of cases we're kind of in the business of both. Pain and hope, fears and dreams, all these things that happen in one life on one planet. And I don't know, but I guess the short answer is our editor is kind of the one steering the ship in terms of, hey, what are we saying today? What are people reading? And just making sure it's cohesive.
Remember to yeah. Do you think your audience sees a difference between people buying a T-shirt to help a cause and supporting a cause outright? Old philanthropists have this notion that when you give, you shouldn't get anything in return, and that having the expectation of something in return cheapens the process. I don't see that with your organization. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah. I'm going to paraphrase a little bit or a lot. Basically, when somebody buys a T-shirt, do we see it as them supporting a cause or simply making a purchase?
Correct.
And then what's the last part? Kind of the old model or the old idea.
The old model of not receiving.
Yeah. The old idea maybe being that when you give, it's simply to give, that you shouldn't receive something. Right. For us, again, I think we don't spend too much time thinking about it. We continue to sell T-shirts because we began by selling T-shirts. So for us, it's a lot less. It's a lot less of some marketing system, and it's really the product of us continuing to live out the story that we started with. We believe that the T-shirt has meaning. There's hundreds and hundreds and now thousands of conversations that have been sparked by people wearing this T-shirt. And I think it helps in our case in that our title is really odd. It's very provocative. And so it's not just, oh, that's a cool shirt, but it's, what does your shirt mean? What do those words mean? And so for us, we've seen a T-shirt become more than a T-shirt. Do some people buy it because they heard it was cool? I'm sure there's been some of that, but we can't control all of that. I think all we can control is the work that we do and the things that we communicate. But for us, it went back to the very beginning. We started selling T-shirts to try to help our friend, and those T-shirts continue to sell, and every time we sell a T-shirt, it allows us to help more people. Whether that's giving to treatment, whether that's creating events, whether that's hiring people that can, create the content that goes out online and makes its way around the world. Do you want to sit here? Okay.
The work that you are doing is so important as a non-millennial. How do you help me reach other non-millennials to get them involved?
Yeah, someone said the work that we do is important as a non-millennial. How can we help them
reach other non-millennials?
Well, first off, thank you. Thank you for caring. Thank you for believing in what we do. I think that everyone has some kind of influence. Whether it's friends or coworkers, maybe you have a blog that a lot of people read, maybe you have a blog that 20 people read. We all have some kind of influence, and so much of our story has been people of all ages using whatever influence they have to share this message of To Write Love on Our Arms, or even to simply introduce the work of To Write Love on Our Arms. And so, there's, I think the one thing we come back to a lot is it's a conversation that tends not to happen. And yet we think it's one that's really important. At the end of the day, our dream is not that people will think our charity's super cool or super amazing, but really we believe that there's people that feel alone in their struggles. There's people that feel alone in their depression or their addiction. There's people thinking about suicide, and we hope we can be some kind of tool or vehicle that leads to people getting help, that leads to people opening up and being honest and not feeling alone, not being alone in the middle of this tough stuff. So I guess to answer it specifically, we just think you use whatever influence you have to talk to the people around you, whether that's a conversation over coffee or whether that's something you post on Facebook. We've seen so much good come from people just being honest. You want to ask for more?
Yeah.
Does anybody else have any more questions? We're here. We still got a couple more minutes. Yeah, I guess we got 5 more minutes. So if there's anything you want to ask, now is the time. I was going to make a joke earlier that I've never used video chat for this, what we're doing now. I've only used video chat a couple times, and it's normally when I have a crush on a girl and she lives in a different place and I want to communicate with her. So it's good to do something else. Somebody's got some kind of question. Maybe it's the end of the day and you guys are spent. One thing I'll say, and you can tell me if a question comes in. We try to end every talk, and obviously this is a different subject specifically, but just want to acknowledge the fact that there's other people on the end of, you're sitting there at a computer and you're a real person with a real story, and maybe you're sitting there on behalf of a nonprofit, maybe you're super curious about fundraising, but we want to maybe take a moment and just say, hey, that you matter, and if the stuff that we talk about is something you relate to or it's something you struggle with, then please know that you deserve a support system. You deserve people in your life that you can be honest with, that you can lean on. It seems like in this life it goes a lot better when we live life in community, when we have other people who help, carry the weight of our questions and our burdens. So I guess just want to say that you deserve that. If things are really difficult or really painful or intense, then please know that great help exists. We believe so much in professional counselors. We believe in people who work in the realm of drug treatment and suicide prevention. So just know that there's people that have devoted their careers and a large part of their lives to helping other people, navigate the hardest parts of their story. So if you need help, please know it's okay to ask for help.
When it comes to growth, are you worried about having more money to have more staff? Will you have to get more aggressive about asking for money?
So the question was, when it comes to growth, are we worried about having more money to be able to add to our staff?
Right.
Or
will you, or we have to get more aggressive about asking for money?
Or will we have to get more aggressive in terms of asking for money? Good question. In terms of staff, we've been at roughly the same level for the last few years. And I don't know. So, winning that $1 million certainly changed what this year would look like for us. And we're smart enough to know that we probably won't win $1 million every year. So I think, one thing is that we really wanted to use that money wisely in ways that could help us answer that question in a way that could just lead to sustainability and to creating in things. One example would be we were able to hire a director of sales, and so that's a person who we pay, but it's obviously an investment where we hope that they're going to help us grow our business, because we've never really had someone on our team that was devoted to running the business that funds everything we do. So I think we're trying to make wise choices in terms of investments. But I hope that our values will stay the same, and if there's real needs, then I think we want to share them with our audience. If we have an opportunity or a need, even if it's something as specific as a position or a staff member, I think we really try to let our audience behind the scenes, for the most part, and I think so we would want to just communicate that need with people. But my hope is that we'll continue to be consistent in terms of the way we do things and the way we talk about things.
This will be the last question, unless you want to end on something. We have a minute left. Has your organization developed into state chapters? Is this something that you will be looking into as you grow?
Yeah, so the question was, have we developed into state chapters, and is it something we're interested in? We have somewhere in the realm of 70 university chapters, mostly in the U.S., a couple in Canada, and those are student-led chapters on college campuses. And then I think we have in the realm of 160 active high schools that are participating in our Storytellers program. And really the U chapter, or the university chapter, it's starts with someone saying, I want to bring the work that you're doing to my campus, to my community. And, they go through a training, they really learn what we do and what we believe and how we do things. And then they're able to bring this conversation back to their school, whether that's weekly or bi-weekly meetings, events throughout the semester, trying to point people to resources on campus or point people to resources in the community, or simply trying to create a safe space where people can begin relationships, and hopefully that leads to conversations where people get help and people feel like they can talk about this stuff. So for us, we've it really works with our audience being younger. Naturally, college students fit that. So I think we've really focused on that model as opposed to the the regional, just general doing it by a certain city or a certain state. Our team is still small. It's everything we do is a lot for us to manage, but it's been amazing to see not just the growth of the U chapters, but also to see them share ideas. We actually just hosted our first ever summit of all our U chapter leaders. And so we had college students from across the country and even beyond that came together for 4 days to share ideas, to hear from our team, to hear from experts, and to really learn, how do I do this work back at my school? And so for us, I think that's how we're answering the question right now. We cover a lot of ground in terms of, right now we have people out on the Warped Tour, which is a nationwide tour that is attended by roughly 600,000 young people across North America. I think it's been going for roughly 15 years. It's the longest running, most successful summer tour. We really love to hang our hat on being involved there, and we kind of anchor the nonprofit area in some different ways. And we have people, we have folks out on the road going to other music festivals. So our team is based in Florida, but we do cover a lot of ground through a lot of different avenues.
Last words?
Just want to thank you guys. Thank you for the work that you do. Thank you. Hopefully with whatever work you do, the common thread for all of us is that we care about people. So regardless of the continent or the people group or the specific problem that you're trying to solve, hopefully the thing we all agree on is that people matter, and we're trying to make this planet better for people, and trying to make life a little easier for people. So thank you guys for giving me this time. Thanks for spending an hour with us, and enjoy the rest of your day.